Hey, this is Amir Borman, another episode of the Talent Tango. On this week is Amanda Gerhardt-King. She is in charge of talent acquisition at CP Insights. So Amanda is a seasoned talent acquisition professional with a background in agency internal experience. In her current role as director of talent at CP Insights, she manages a team of 8 and spends her day speaking with happy, helpful, humble, and hungry candidates. When she isn't headcount planning, budgeting, or thinking of new ways to promote CBI's employer brand, she hangs out with her husband and 1-year-old daughter. Hey, Amanda, thanks for being on this week.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I know before we started, we were chatting about kids. I was like, I got a 5-year-old turning 6 next week, and you have a 1-year-old. How have you been coping with sleep and work? It was a nightmare. That's when I got introduced to coffee, was when my little one was born.
Yeah, I seriously just weaned off my 4 cups a day addiction of espresso and coffee. It was a lot. And, I'm so fortunate at CB Insights. It is a really fantastic place to work. And so I have a moderately flexible work schedule. I'm actually working from home today. I work from home, 1 to 2 days a week, which really, really helps. So, cuts down on that commute time for sure. But yeah, my kid is great. She already sleeps through the night. So I'm so fortunate, which is how I can kind of wean down off that coffee addiction. And, the first few months were rough, but I think everyone was very, aware that I was pregnant and had a child. We're a small enough office that everyone knows everyone. And so it was exciting when I came back to work, and they were all just very sensitive to the fact that I may be tired and losing my mind. So, but it's fine now. Now I can get a full night's sleep, and we're happy about that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I remember the coffee started, and then I didn't stop. So I flash forward 6 years. My wife was like, "Hey, Amir, do you realize that when you don't have coffee, you get a little bit irritable?" I go, "No." She goes, "Pay attention next time." I go, "Okay." And then we were out in Texas for a wedding, and I was like, "Oh, it's about 3 o'clock, and I'm really getting kind of testy and kind of noticing my." And she was like, "That's the caffeine addiction." So she worked with me, and I was like, "I'm going to stop drinking coffee." So over the last month, I have kind of weaned myself down. And in the last week, I've actually been 0 drop of coffee, which is kind of
crazy. Wow. That's crazy. I don't know if I can go that crazy.
It's crazy.
Good for you, though.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to go completely off of it. And then if I want a cup, once in a while, I'll have a cup. But yeah, I was like, it was just too far. I was like, I got to.
Yeah, it gets real bad, especially in the summer, because you're like, oh, it's a fun activity. We'll go out for iced coffee. We'll go to a coffee shop, let the kid run around. I can't get rid of it just yet.
Yeah, now you're early on the path, but speaking about the early path, I mean, you got a fantastic background. I thought we could start where we always start on this show and kind of just go through your origin story of how you started your career and how you ended up in the talent space.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people, you don't go to school to become a recruiter or learn about talent acquisition. I actually went to school, was originally a music major, and switched over to event planning. And so when I graduated college in 2008, so not the best time to necessarily start a career, I was a wedding planner at a really high-end country club in Atlanta, Georgia, and did that for about 3 years before I decided I wanted to leave Georgia and move up to New York, but really wanted my weekends and nights back. So switched over into more of a sales role, but still in the wedding industry. And when that company wasn't doing too well, I, decided it was time for a shift and really needed to think about what I wanted to do. And so I met with an agency recruiter, and they said, "Oh, you have interesting background kind of in sales. You like working with people. Have you ever thought about becoming a recruiter?" And of course I said no, because who kind of thinks of that? And, they sent me on an interview for this company agency side, and I really liked the people. I liked the training opportunities, and that's just kind of how I fell into it. And, that was, I think, back in 2012. So I've been in the talent acquisition space ever since.
Wow. And I guess you made your way to the corporate side. When you look back on kind of your voyage, is there anything that stands out in your experience working for a recruitment agency versus being in-house?
Yeah, I think that they are very different, but I think starting off, I'm glad that I did agency side, because they did offer a lot of training. They kind of knew that everyone they hired didn't have a background in this. And so they really taught you the essentials of how to be a great recruiter. And since I did kind of already have that sales background, I think a lot of it transferred over fairly easily, like just how to make a phone call, how to leave a voicemail, how to draft an email, to, make it sizzle and things like that, to grab someone's attention. So I'm glad that I went that route. But then as my time went on in agency, I really wanted to see, longer term people that I've placed and really handhold kind of the entire interview process. So the time was right for me to move internally.
I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and I see lots of discussions about training. And you see the HR conferences talk about training and that part. I guess you notice the difference yourself, but when you're in the corporate side as a director of talent acquisition, do you see the people that come from the agency side versus just maybe going through the internal corporate side? Do you see that difference in most people moving through, or was that just, do you think, an anomaly with your background?
I actually do see a little bit of a difference. Right now, I have a team of 6 recruiters, and half of them come from agency and half of them come from internal. And it is just slightly different, like terminology that you use, slightly different ways of kind of moving through the interview process. So I wouldn't say anything is so drastic, but I do think that there are little, like, just nuances here and there that you would get from either internal or agency. I don't think there's one right way or wrong way to do it either. I think that they're both fantastic, and you can kind of, merge both together and come up with your own style.
Yeah, I'm a big believer this is more art than science. So if anyone says there's a single right way, I challenge them because, I've seen, big personalities and sales type people excel. I've had, introverted personalities excel. I think it just depends what you do with the direction and how you make it your own.
Agreed.
I guess you mentioned 6 people and you've been there for 3 years. So what kind of growth have you seen at CB Insights? And obviously, just for people listening, CB Insights, we actually subscribe to just the monthly email newsletter that comes out. We don't necessarily have a market for it, the details that go behind it, but it's fantastic because there's always a little tidbit about the market. You're like, wow, how'd you guys come up with that? But how's the growth been, and kind of how have you been involved with just seeing the increase in headcount over the last 3 years?
It's been fantastic. So I was their first recruitment hire, and there were 60 of us. And it was like a really fun time when I started, because everyone really needed their recruitment support and they weren't quite sure they were getting a recruiter. So when I started, I was just getting random like high fives and hugs from people who were like, oh, thank God, like you're here. So that was really fun for me. Like in my first week, I was like, oh, this is cool. It's going to be a cool place to work. But now we're at 250. So for the first kind of year, we doubled in size. And now we've been growing at about a 50% growth rate. And we should end the year at around 320. And then next year, I don't have headcount yet, so I don't want to say, but we'll probably continue on this trajectory. And so it's been really great. We're really a different organization than we were even a year prior, just year over year. It's a completely different org. So it's been nice to see that grow and just like have, a direct hand in helping the company grow and scale like this.
That's pretty significant. So you mentioned 60 people, you're anticipating 320. As you're sitting down and looking at this, I mean, that's and even from this year to 320, that seems like with your team of 6, that seems like in this market, a lot of hires. How do you sit down and account for that? What's the planning that goes into addressing how that headcount will happen and how your staff is going to handle the actual hiring of those additional bodies?
There's a lot that goes into it. And I'm actually going through, Q3 rollout of headcount and reforecasting for the first half of the year to the second half of the year. So it starts really with our SVP of finance, kind of taking a look at budget, where we want to be revenue-wise by the end of the year, what our goals are, and then where we need to kind of grow to support that within each different department. And then I will go in and kind of take that headcount and run with it. So partner really closely with the hiring managers and department leads to say, here's your headcount. Where do you allocate it to? What does your org chart look like over the next quarter, over the next half year, full year? And then kind of once we have all that in line and it gets approved by, senior leadership and whatnot, I take a look just on a quarterly basis, depending on where my recruiters are at, what level they're at, and divide each role based on priority and difficulty to fill. So I get the priorities from senior leadership. Here's the 3 tiers of all of our departments. What are the priority roles, depending on departments that we really need to work on, that we need to dedicate the majority of our resources to? And then I break it down by role. What's going to be a really difficult to fill position? What's going to be a moderate to fill? And what's going to be an easy to fill? And I have some parameters around those. Is it going to be a director level position or above? Those are always going to be difficult to fill. Is it something that we're going to get a lot of applications for that's going to be easier to fill? Things like that go into deciding those kind of factors. And then I'll look at my recruiters and kind of give them headcount depending on that. So if it's a slightly more senior level recruiter, they may have less headcount, but more difficult and priority to fill positions, things of that nature.
Interesting. So when you're looking at the priority, so obviously the SVP, they're looking at the forecast revenue and you're given the priority. Are you then sitting down with each department head or each manager to assess the requirements on a potential role by role basis?
Yeah. So, if you have an open head count, you have 10 open head count for your department, I will make department leads sit down and list within that which ones are going to be priority. And it may be that recruiters don't support all of them. The lowest level priority may get shifted off to another quarter. The hiring managers may have to handle that. We're in a position right now where we're staffed up enough where every recruiter can support every single department and every single headcount, which is fantastic. But in previous quarters, it may be, okay, this is a lower level priority. Do you really need it? If you absolutely want it, then that's fine. You're going to have to handle it. With the recruiters are going to focus their efforts on these, top 10 or top 20% things that we must fill. It's always like top 80%. But
Yeah, absolutely. Is there that pinch mid-quarter where something changes, somebody leaves, there's a backfill position you anticipate, and all of a sudden you need to leverage outside agencies, or is it just reprioritizing your internal team?
So I do take into consideration anticipated attrition. We've figured it out kind of on a monthly basis right now by team. And so I give the recruiters a little bit of breathing room in their headcount to backfill as needed. Or, we always know that this could shift. This could shift next week. It could shift in 2 months. We can be hiring for this role and then decide it's no longer needed. Stuff like that happens, absolutely. And we just need to kind of roll with it. Adaptability is definitely one of our core values on our team. But I do take that into consideration when I'm kind of like moving forward with these headcounts and making sure that we can handle that as well.
Where do you do all this planning? Is it you guys have a system? Is it in Excel? Or where do you guys keep track of the forecast and the headcount?
Google Sheets.
Google Sheets. I love it. I'm pro Google
So
Sheets.
many
Everything.
Google Sheets, yeah.
I think I actually uninstalled Microsoft Office. Not that I don't like the product. I just realized I never used it anymore.
Please never use it, yeah.
Yeah, everything's in the cloud. And I'm like, and it loads up instantly versus Excel seems to take about 15 seconds on my Mac to fire up each time.
Yeah, it really does. But I will say, in response to one of your other questions, we do use outside agencies occasionally if need be, but we really try not to.
Well, I mean, you guys are obviously, you're trying to get to the, let's say, 320 head count. And there are obviously those hard, moderate, easy. And I'm sure if the hards or the end roles are taking a little bit longer and there's priority, I'm sure that's where the outside agency comes in. I was curious, when it comes to outside agencies, and I know some of the listeners are actually recruiters that listen to this podcast, but is there a criteria and evaluation process that you guys use in terms of working with those agencies by, let's say, by discipline or just by, or I don't know what basis you would be doing? I've heard different types. I wonder how you're maybe differentiating the outside agencies.
So we definitely do it either based on relationships that we've had previously or area of expertise. I prefer to do it by area of expertise. And then I always do references, actually. For any vendor that we use, we'll do references. So I asked for another company of our size in this area who've hired for similar roles, 2 to 3 of them, and I want to see what their process was like, similar to how I do references for candidates. So yeah, we do definitely use some great agencies that are just a little bit more focused in whatever area we need to hire in, primarily on sales, not too much in engineering right now, but yeah.
I love that because it's part of my premise and thesis that agency recruitment will all be specialized in short period. I think in outside the US and the UK and Australia, Asia, everyone is very niche oriented in terms of what they do. I think in the States, we're very behind and we're broad from the agency standpoint. I think there's going to be more and more companies who decide they're going to stay within a specific lane because they'll understand. They'll actually be consultants. They'll be able to say, "Hey, Amanda, we know the market. Here's what we see. Let me tell you what it is," and then lets you kind of use that as a guidance when you're doing your planning. So I think that I like the fact that you do references and leverage that expertise because I think that's where it's all going.
We were vetting a few companies for like a potential C-level position or like the SVP level position, actually. And there were some agencies that I found that seemed great. I couldn't even get in. I was like trying to find someone to speak to. And they were so niche that you have to be like kind of referral only. And I didn't know anyone who used them. And so I was like, talking to people like, have you used this agency before? Have you used this agency before? Like,
Wow.
they seem great. But yeah, they are that niche and they take on so few clients a year. So they can really be that strategic partner that, yeah, we couldn't even figure out a way to use them. Didn't need them eventually, but it was interesting.
Well, you got a good staff, a staff of 6. I mean, that will handle a lot of roles. And the process sounds fantastic.
They're a great team. Couldn't be happier.
Yeah. So in terms of your team, I was curious, I guess in your intro, and I'd seen it on your LinkedIn, helpful, humble, hungry, happy, the 4 H's.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's our CB Insights kind of like culture code. We always hire for the 4 H's, happy, helpful, humble, and hungry. Everyone who works there really embodies those 4 H's, among other things as well. We value clarity of thought and we value strategic thinking and adaptability, like I mentioned before, kind of experimenting to win and different things like that. But definitely those 4 H's is something that we hire for. That's just a core value of CB Insights and that we actually vet for during the interview process.
How hard a requirement is that? So, I mean, I think the 4 H's, they encompass so much of the company's values in terms of like when you're actually going through the process. Is it a real strict adherence? Is there some flexibility based on, I guess, department and candidate? Kind of talk to us about that component.
Yeah. So I think that, every department has their own unique culture. Sales is going to be very different than engineering, but at our core, we're still hiring for those 4 H's. So if you are not a very humble salesperson, for example, you're probably not going to be the best fit here. If you're not a very hungry, meaning like a driven engineer, you're not maybe going to be the best fit here. So even though the departments could be very different, and sure, we obviously like evaluate differently for those different departments, it's absolutely core values everyone must adhere.
I like that.
We will definitely not hire someone if we find them not to be humble.
I'm a big fan of empathy, and I think a lot of your 4 H's kind of fit into partially being empathetic.
I think a lot of people right now are talking about more like culture ads versus culture fit.
Yes.
And I feel like that relates to a lot of companies who are like, our culture is, going out at night and having a ping pong table and things like that. But we actually look for culture fit because we really do want people to embody those 4 H's. And then there's culture ads in other areas.
So obviously you've grown from 60 to you're trying to hit 320 and you have, the values. How does that impact the day-to-day? Meaning, what do you guys do to embody that so that it's actually part of the company, not just, something on a website?
That's a good question. I think that in general, we always try to be really transparent and helpful to one another. I don't think that we need to do anything as a company to enhance or show off those values because it's just something that everyone kind of like has inherently. And it's something that we evaluate for like end of year reviews or potential for promotions and things like that. We do look for that. Like, are you being helpful to the people around you? Are you a humble human and things like that? But not something that, we're going to do on a day-to-day basis or even hold like necessarily trainings around. We hold a lot of learning and development and coaching and career opportunities and trainings like that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be around these 4 H's.
And then the 6, I guess your team is 6. When you guys are talking about the 4 H's, I guess when you bring somebody on, you mentioned people, internal corporate backgrounds, like how did they come on board and how do you guys help them understand how to look for the 4 H's? Because it's one thing to say, hey, helpful, and that's kind of could be a very subjective term in terms of what I view as helpful. How do you guys work across the recruiting team to have everyone understand how to evaluate for those 4 H's, those values?
So we have actually in our interview plans, we do it like a structured interview plan. We have a rubric. So meaning we ask the same general questions to every single candidate that comes in at every stage along the process. So not just the recruiters, but also the interview panel. And we do train our interview panels on this. And we have a culture fit panel traditionally for every single interview. And we have questions surrounding happy, helpful, humble, and hungry. And then the rubric says what's a great answer, what's a good answer, and what's a bad answer. And we did this to really kind of eliminate bias. Everyone has some sort of unconscious bias about them. We do unconscious bias training at CDI. We do it for interview panels and things like that. And this is to remove any of that. But it also helps to like have those very clear questions surrounding our culture as people kind of like move through the process. So we can say what a good answer is, what a great answer is, and what a not good answer is. And then once we hire folks and they're going through onboarding, we actually do something that I created called unicorn training. And it's really just to get them set up for success at CB Insights. And it's a course of 3 trainings, but the first one is actually surrounding, the happy, helpful, humble, and hungry, but also 10 other elements of how to really be successful at CB Insights. And so that's kind of how we all level set as people come on board. And it's something directly from our CEO. He presented it in all hands that we had, and I took it and ran with it and put some case studies in around who kind of like embodies these qualities and trends outside of our 4-H's within CB Insights to show people how to really be successful.
Just a side topic, you mentioned the unicorn training. I like that. And the components. So somebody who's been working at CB Insights for a couple of years, is there any continued training to kind of keep them engaged?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious about that.
So much.
Okay.
We have one of our director of people with an L&D background. And so she will do a lot of like company-wide trainings. We also do individual trainings like by department. So engineering has lunch and learns, sales has a whole enablement team, a lot that goes into our continued ongoing training and growth opportunities within CBI. I always say I don't hire just for this role. I'm looking beyond as to what people want. I don't need this to necessarily be a good fit for someone short term. I want it to be a good fit for someone long term as well. So, we're asking those questions during the interview process and then relaying that back to the team to make sure that we're really setting someone up for success.
So I guess, you mentioned attrition. When it comes to the retention piece, in terms of your core values, do you see that coming into play in terms of helping people, stay with CBI longer in general?
We think that people really want growth opportunities and learning development. And so I think that more comes into the retention piece.
Sure.
Our HR team, we kind of have separate functions right now. While I sit under the people operations team, I'm mostly focused on an employee experience kind of, when they first hear about CB Insights and up until their initial start date. And then the HR team kind of handles it from there and through life cycle. Yeah.
Makes sense. So you mentioned, I know before the podcast, we kind of touched on employer brand. I mentioned that I know of the company and I think you guys have a pretty strong brand name.
Thank you.
I look for the emails monthly because there's always some chart there. I'm like, how'd they come up with this? It's really cool. So how does your name brand come in? Like, do you guys get that feedback from candidates when you're hiring? Oh, I know you guys are, I already know that coming in, or is that something that you're seeing on your side?
It really depends on which department, to be honest. So we have a really fantastic, what we call an intelligence unit team. They're the ones who are kind of producing the content that you see. So when we speak to candidates in that team, absolutely. I hope that they have heard of us if it's, something that they had done prior. For engineers, probably not so much unless they're, really interested in kind of like startup data and what's going on in emerging technology trends. And sales, sometimes, definitely. So I think it just kind of depends. We're really trying to build our brand a little bit more for those engineers to make it so they see us more and see us as like a really fantastic place to work for engineers, because it absolutely is. We're always using cutting edge technology and we're kind of language agnostic, and they get to work with a ton of really interesting data sets and doing some like really complex things. And we have like a machine learning component to it and everything. So I feel like in that area, we could probably be doing a little bit better, but absolutely a lot of people have heard of us, which makes it really happy and, makes it fantastic for us as recruiters and excited for when people come in and they're excited to speak with us and we're so excited to speak with them. So, and that way it usually works out.
Yeah, you guys are a 4-star on Glassdoor, which to me, anything above a 3.5 on Glassdoor is amazing because there's a lot of companies under 3.5. So you guys are doing something right over there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really just a testament to, we have great leaders. We have 2 great, fantastic co-founders with a fantastic vision and great senior management. So, and it's just a fun place to work. Really nice people.
Yeah. So just curious, when you mentioned fun place to work, what do you guys do for, I guess, social activities? I know diversity and inclusion is a big thing, but what do you guys do, I guess, in terms of company activities and kind of, just kind of touching on inclusion as a company initiative?
So each team kind of does their own happy hours. Everyone has like kind of a team budget for that and you can go out and do fun things. But as a company, we usually do kind of get-togethers every other month. And then we also have smaller events that we're trying to put together to just like kind of build that kind of cross-functional relationship for teams that don't necessarily speak on a day-to-day basis. We're also doing a yearly offsite, which we just had, I think, last month, which was just down the Jersey Shore, which is really nice to get away for a day and do team building and bonding exercises. So we have a lot going on. It's always something to do. And then we also have a large events team, which doesn't put on our internal events, but it's just a great opportunity to get outside of the office. We just hosted our largest conference of the year, Future of FinTech, which had 1,000 people at it. And it's just a way for literally every department to come together for one big project and then all attend this event. It's fantastic.
Very cool. Wow, sounds like a fantastic place to be. You had touched upon strategic partnering with hiring managers. I think we also touched on before the podcast and kind of going through your capacity planning. I guess just from your point of view, how do you view your team as a strategic partner to those hiring managers?
I think we are a very strategic partner to our hiring managers. And it's because we're very intentional about it and because we can show such value to them. And we have in the past and we will continue to do so. So, we do that by one, it starts, with our headcount and budgeting planning when I'm speaking with them and kind of getting their priorities. But then when I give it to recruiters, they take those roles and schedule time to meet with hiring managers or department leads, whoever key decision makers are. And we do like a very formalized kind of structured hiring intake meeting where we talk about things not only about the role, but how we are going to partner together for the recruiting team and for their team. How can we integrate ourselves into their workflow in a very non-obtrusive way, but so we can understand what they do on a day-to-day, so we can more accurately speak to candidates about it. So that can be something as little as going to a stand-up, attending a meeting, sitting with the team. Maybe we'll go to some of their happy hours. Like I said, every team gets to kind of plan their own happy hours and have a budget for that. So we're included on those a lot. We're invited to that. And, when people see us, when they see our face and when they trust that we know what they are doing, and therefore we can speak to candidates about what their team is doing, what makes it unique and what makes it cool and special and fun, that strategic partnership really, I think, comes into play. I always say we're pretty good. We can always do something to move the needle 1 to 2 more percent. But I think in general, CB Insights has always really valued the recruiting team. And it's nice to be a part of that and to show our worth. We really don't have that situation where someone says, nah, I don't trust HR or recruiters. I'm just going to do this by myself. Or we've never been in a situation where people aren't giving us really clear, consistent feedback because they don't trust in what we're doing. We've positioned ourselves in a way that we can and really be there and understand what's going on with them and what makes us unique so we can position to candidates and find ourselves other awesome people to work with.
So I guess part of that partnership is when each department setting up interview processes, are you guys working with each department to ensure the process fits their optimal flow?
Yes. So we talk actually about their best communication style and we tailor our communication to them. So are they in person? Are they Slack? Are they email? We will tailor that to them. And then also, let's be cognizant of how much time we're taking. So, once we kind of calibrate searches, we usually just run with it. So they're only really needed for maybe an in-person interview and maybe a closing. So it doesn't take so much of their time either. So, they can focus on their day jobs and we're doing our day job.
Yeah, I think the interview process, some managers seem to be really difficult to get on board sometimes. Like when you get that one manager who just says, I'm just too busy to even be involved. And obviously you have priority. What steps do you take to make sure that obviously they're back in the fold and they're on board with the process?
Honestly, I'm so fortunate. We really have not run into that situation too often. Obviously, people get busy and maybe recruiting has to take a backseat, but then we can hold off. And it really comes down to, do you need this role? If you're that busy, will this role help you, enable you, support you in order to get other work done? So then that needs to kind of become a priority. And so we do have those conversations. For example, like I mentioned, we have that large event, Future of FinTech, that takes up the entire companies all week. We just kind of paused in-person interviews for that week because we knew no one was going to be able to attend. And you just have to clearly communicate that to candidates, right? It's all about that candidate experience and that transparency and that communication of, we have this huge thing going on. We're probably not going to be able to meet with you. I know that may mess up your timeline or something, but here's what our timeline is. So as long as we're all on the same page with that together, it's fine. But I do know, and I have talked to other recruiters who have been in this situation where a hiring manager just will not respond to them, doesn't care about them, is too busy, and they just stop working on that rec. Because if you don't want to hire, if you're too busy for anything that we are doing, you clearly don't need this position. And so we just won't recruit for it.
I mean, it makes sense. If they don't value your assistance or don't need the help or they don't have time to help themselves, then I mean, you can only do so much. So I 100% agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned candidate experience, something that I hear. I mean, we work with a lot of companies, and the one thing that we hear is obviously, hey, third-party recruiters tend to drop the ball when the candidate isn't in play for them. I mean, that's a bad part of the industry, which has to be improved. I've been hearing from candidates that a lot of times internal recruiters, the same thing's happening because they're obviously rushing to fill the role. So you mentioned you guys are getting back to people and giving them that update that, hey, we're going to be shut down for a week. I mean, I think that's amazing because I think that's the big gap all the way around. And how do you ensure your team of six, like everyone understands that that feedback loop is absolutely important?
I think candidate experience is just paramount because I always say if you have a bad experience, you tell 10 people. If you have a good experience, you tell one person. I have rejected candidates before that we are not going to hire that have come back and given us referrals. And we've actually hired some of those referrals before. And that's all a testament to they had a really great candidate experience. And what that means is transparency and communication and, treating them with respect, recognizing that they are human and that they have their own things going on and just learning about them, right? Just keeping those lines of communication open. And it's something that I talk about when I hire my recruiters during their interview process is candidate experience, how their candidate experience was, what they consider to be a good candidate experience, how, they treat their candidates currently. And I don't hire people who I think just didn't uphold that and maybe didn't have a great sense of what candidate experience could and should be. And then we talk about it, in our onboarding. We actually use Greenhouse as our applicant tracking system. And they do a great job of kind of showing people in play as long as you keep that data clean. So I'm just pretty big on just making sure that you're responding to those candidates and closing them out in Greenhouse if we've moved on or if they're no longer in place. That way you can easily look and say, I have 14 people in preliminary phone screen. I have 3 in assessment. I have 2 coming in person. I have 1 in offer stage. Who do I need to talk to for each one of my roles? So that really helps too.
Yeah, and it sounds like you don't overburden each recruiter, where I think that's obviously part of the issue is that the people tend to start taking shortcuts when they are pressed for time. Obviously, if they're not good at their job, they might, but if they're pressed, they start seeing where they could save a minute here and a minute there. And all of a sudden that means they're just not tying out the loop with somebody and they're 6 weeks later, the candidate's emailing going, hey, by the way, what happened here?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That is something I consider because I think that if you are spread too thin, you really aren't making progress in any one particular area. So I can give all my recruiters 20 roles. That's great, but we're not going to fill them. I'd rather give them something that we can handle, that we can fill so we can continue to scale.
Yeah, I'm a serial. Like everyone says, oh, you have to multitask. And I'm like, I can actually do one thing really well at a time, or I can do 4 things very, very crummy at a time. So I prefer to do one, go to the other. And same thing with recruiting, like even internally, my staff here, I prefer them to focus on one client, one role, and then move on and do something else versus they're trying to juggle 3 recs at one time. I'm like, you're just not servicing anyone then, and the quality will suffer.
Exactly. And I was actually talking to one of my recruiters yesterday, and they were saying, here's my head count. And then once I fill, I'll get more. And I was like, no, if you fill your head count, great. Then you can really focus and hone in on the other ones that you have. At some point, I'll give you more, but it doesn't automatically mean that when one's done, another one gets added onto your plate. That just means you have more time for the others. So yeah, I totally agree. Actually, as part of the unicorn training, I'll come back to that. One of the 3 sessions is a time management. And in time management, we go over how you can no longer multitask and you really can only focus on one thing to do it effectively and do it well. And so we show some tips and tricks on how to manage time effectively so that you can do that. So you can kind of eliminate that multitasking factor, which I used to do all the time. I was like queen of multitasking. So, but nothing was getting done.
I love that term unicorn training. I think it's fantastic. The multitasking, I joke with my wife, I can't do this, but she'll be on the laptop, she'll be checking her phone, and then there's the TV playing. And I'm like, do you want me to pause it so we can have you catch up? She goes, no, I know what's going on. And randomly, after 9 years of marriage, I'll still pause it and go, what just happened? She goes, just stop it. This is what happened. I'm like, how do you do this? This is like a magic trick because I can barely watch the TV and, not check my phone and get distracted. So I guess some of us have it and others don't, but too cool. I'm cognizant of time. I know we're kind of getting to the end of our podcast time with you, and I want to kind of get to the wrap up stage with you. As I mentioned early before we started, I do like to leave the podcast with some piece of advice or some piece of knowledge that you'd share. And it could be somebody who, it could be anything relevant to somebody who's starting out or somebody who's already in the industry, or maybe another person in management that you go, I wish somebody would have told me this, or really anything that you feel could maybe benefit somebody. So just want to see what you think you have for the audience.
I have two things. And one is kind of what we already touched on, which is just keeping that high candidate experience. You really never know who you're going to run into, who that person knows, who you're going to meet. So just keeping and maintaining those relationships and really treating everyone with empathy and with respect is really, I think, key to kind of moving forward in your recruiting career. And then the other one is my personal work motto, which I like to share with people because I don't know, it's my favorite. It's so simple. It's just work hard and be nice to people. And that's how I feel.
That's
it.
Awesome. I love that. That resonates with me. I mean, mine's very similar to that. And mine's be good. And I like the work hard. And you thought you wouldn't have one, and you had two. And I think both are fantastic. But
Thank you.
I appreciate you being on. A fantastic background, very interesting experiences. And we're going to tag you in the show. If somebody needs to reach out, is there an optimal platform they could do that through?
Yeah, definitely. Always LinkedIn. Always on it.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we include that. Again, thank you for taking the time to do this. We'll include your contact details, your LinkedIn in the show notes. And please provide any feedback, listeners out there. We are still early stages in the podcast, and we do want to improve. If there's any feedback constructive, we're happy for it. Please subscribe. And also, if there's any questions that you'd like us to pose to another talent acquisition director, manager, let us know, because we're always looking to see what other topics to cover. And I appreciate the chat, Amanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.